Welcome back. We're ready to get started for the exposed stitch, and we are going to be doing this over leather. So the handouts that were given to you come from Keith Smith's. Typically, he does non-adhesive bindings for his structures, and also Alyssa Golden's The Exposed Long Stitch. So it's going to be a hybrid, so you can see what the stitch is going to look like over the leather. And then this is a piece of leather, so you get an idea of what that's going to look like. We won't have the raised cords because everything's going to be exposed, but you should have had a piece of leather sent to you, as well as some Bristol board, which we're going to use to reinforce the interior of the spine, as well as some sheets for folding for your signatures. This is that MBM paper, which is really quite nice. But what we're going to do is create quartos again, and the best way to go about that, we're sticking with the green direction, is that we'll take this individual sheet, fold that in half, tear a little over halfway, take those loose ends, and fold that over, and then you have your self-contained signature. I'm going to repeat that for each one in this stack. Piece of leather that you have in your kit, you can do some different designing, and I'm pulling out my old P22 block stencil that I'm going to do some work with, have some markers, but anything that is a little more permanent will rest on top of there. I also wanted to show you what Angela Van Elden did in the makerspace, where I had a JPEG image and I just made it black and white, and she used the glow forge to actually burn or brand into the leather surface. The only downside to this is that it does have a little bit of lift off. There's a little dirt there, but I would probably have her going a little bit deeper next time, just because it will really brand that surface. Otherwise, you can clean it off with soap and water. What I'm going to do though is just grab my piece of leather, and it's a lot larger than what we need, but I want to do some pattern over the entire thing and playing around. I also have some additional stencils that I'm going to play around with. But from here, basically, you can start playing around with your coloration and figuring out what you're going to do. Now that I have my design done, I wanted to get my boards ready, and we're actually going to cover these boards because these are going to function on the inside as end pages. But you can see that I did coordinate, and so what I'm going to do is just glue this onto the back side, do my turn-ins like normal. Repeat for the other cover. Okay, now that the inside of the covers is completed, I'll show you a finished version. It has the stitching that's exposed on the outside. We got a leather cover, and this will be the interior. So you can see that there's a heavier board that's on there. What we need to do though is to figure out what that spine, I always like to put a liner on the inside since we're going to be going through the spine, and it helps to stabilize along that edge. And so what you can do is, once you've folded your signatures, you can give it just a gentle squeeze to see what the measurement is. And it's about a 1/2 inch, but I'm going to give myself just a little bit extra, and so I'm going to do 5/8 of an inch. And there should have been a piece of Bristol board. And the nice thing about that is that you can utilize your cheater strip, and then basically line that up with an edge. So I have this strip, and then I need to cut it to the height of our board. And I can just measure and cut that, or if I'm feeling pretty brave, I can just eyeball this and trim that down. From here, what we need to do, we'll put the boards to the side, is that I have my cover. I can lay this out, and if there's a certain area that you need to focus on, that's totally fine. But what we're going to do is adhere this down to this space right here. Of course, you can use your waste paper as well. And for this cover, we don't have to turn the leather over the surface, but what we are going to do is to lay these, we're going to glue these out, lay them along here, and what I suggest doing is using your cheater strip as a spacing, a joint spacing between this piece of Bristol board that we placed on here and then the cover. And so we are going to need to let this dry for at least an hour prior to cutting the outside edges. So here, I'm just going to use the same mixture. I'll repeat for the other cover. Definitely place this under weights for at least an hour. If you notice that there were any pink markings, you can use this eraser tool to remove any sort of residue. You can do that prior to your design. I'll come back in an hour and then we'll trim this down. While I'm waiting for this to dry, what I can do is go ahead and punch the holes for my sewing stations. You are going to need to create another jig, so you should have plenty of manila folder in there to work with. But what I wanted to do is I did a 1/2 inch from the head and the tail, and then I did 1 inch from each of those marks just to make it symmetrical and make it easier in case the orientation gets flip-flopped when you're working with your signatures. We're also going to come back to this when we cut the slits for the spine edge, which you can see because we'll be sewing in and out of the cover as we work with this. So just as a reminder, when you lay your jig in there, we'll line this up and then line up our awl and close and punch out. And just repeat for all of the signatures. Once you've gotten all the sewing stations completed, you can see that those should line up really nicely. We're going to use our template to actually create some slits along the spine edge that will create some space for us to actually sew. But what we need to do first is that I've allowed this to dry. I do have the covered boards here, and what we're going to need to do is to very carefully cut along this edge. Notice that I am just cutting along these boards. We are going to create a shape up here that's going to get folded over and glued. So I'm just going from the corners out. You want to be careful not to cut into your board. And from here, what you want to do is cut some tabs. I'm going from the corner out. I am angling it slightly. I'd say that we want about a cheater strip thickness, so about 5/8. Then I'll repeat for the other side. And what I'm going to do is use some PVA, and I'll just turn this over to the inside. It's going to create a nice little rounded edge along that spine. But you can see that it does showcase this covered board on the side, but also gives it some stability and flexibility because of the leather piece. We'll glue these over, and then I'll cut the slits in just a moment. Now that I have my needle secured, I did measure off enough string so you have one for each signature, plus 1 or 2 extra just to make your life a little bit easier. And so for the structure, it doesn't matter whether you start at the top or the bottom, but what we're going to do is we're going to go from the outside to the inside, and what we're going to do is immediately go into that first signature. Leave enough to tie on the outside, but we're going to go in and out So when I exit here, I definitely want to make sure that that's lined up with the slit going from the outside. And so in the instructions, what it tells you to do is to tie a square knot, and it's going to be on this end. And I know that seems a little counterintuitive. We will also tie a square knot at the other end once we've added that second signature. And they did call it a French knot, so that's tying it twice. We'll just bulk it up a little bit more so that cannot slip back through that slit of the cover or the signature. Just want to make sure that that knot is going to rest right over top of the other one. Give a little pull. And you may need to go on the inside. Oops, there we go. It's nice and tight. I do like to make sure that my strings are all the way at the bottom because those cords are going to, the linen thread is going to form that pattern as it goes across. From here, I'm going to grab the next signature, and just like we did with the flatback journal, if you can go over this gently just to make sure that that lays flat. You could also use clothespins on the sides just to hold it steady. But from here, what we're going to do is go from the outside to the inside of that second signature. Go down to the next sewing station. So at this point, you want to make sure that all your stitching is tight. Once that's tight, what you can do is take these two strings and tie a French or square knot. I oftentimes like to trim this down to make sure that knot's nice and tight, but trim down that thread just so it's out of the way. And then from here, I'm going to go up to my next signature. I'll be going from the outside to the inside. We'll once again want to tighten up our stitching, make sure that's lined up. Go on the same pattern in which we were sewing. That seems to be nice and tight. So the only thing that we do differently here is at the end, you may need to pierce this knot that's here, but essentially we're going to be doing a kettle stitch like we did for the flatback journal. So as a reminder, you create a small loop, and then you'll take the needle and go through that loop and pull up towards the new signature. And we're going to continue on for all the other signatures, and at the end of each signature you will on the outside, you'll be doing that kettle stitch to finish it off. Okay, I've continued to add all of the signatures, and I went ahead and added the last one, and you just want to double check to make sure all your stitching is tight, going from the outside, inside to the outside, inside to the outside. And you are going to go ahead and do a kettle stitch the way that we've been doing. And the handouts actually, so nestle that knot there, say that you can go to the inside. So you're going to go back into that sewing station. I'm going to the inside here. And just notice that's not very tight. And then from here, what you can do is you can create a little knot over this top area. You could do a French knot, so tying it twice, also known as a square knot, and then press that over that sewing station there, can trim that down, and if you need to, you can adjust these strings a little bit to kind of even them out, but that should take care of it. You've got the nice little knots on the ends. The only other thing that you would need to do in order to utilize this book is that you will have some sealed pages, so you'll need to go through and tear those open when you're ready to use. Go through there. Your structure is complete. Enjoy.